the honor and privilege to get to be here to share with you this morning. And I think we're going to begin, if you don't mind, by playing a little game. I call it the fill in the blank game. Okay, so I'm going to begin a phrase, and then I'm going to say fill in the blank, and you fill in the blank. So I'm going to start by saying, life is fill in the blank. Oh, a jar of cherries. All right. Okay. Well, and we'll try a different one. I am fill in the blank. Nice. So we're positive, folks, because you could say tired or angry, perfect, whole, and complete, or yes. How about this one? God is fill in the blank. Okay, and since there's already some steaminess in the room, we'll go, my love life is fill in the blank. Quiet, there we go. Thriving. Valentine free. Okay, no strings attached. So what I like to do, I like to play this game, especially when I get caught up in too many stories about myself that lead me to be living in what I would call non-truth, because sometimes I fill in the blank with some negatives. They're not always positive. So I like to just kind of go within and take the blanks away. And I might say something like, my love is, or God is, or I am, or life is. Now, do you get the kind of feeling when we say that? There's something about that that's kind of complete in itself that's very meaningful to me. It reminds me that so often in my life I get so into spinning stories and tales that I forget the whole thing. I'm so lost in tangents that I forget to be on the main road of what I'm about. And this leads me to what I want to share with you about today, is this idea of living your true story. And so I'll begin by asking you, are you living a true story? Is your life a true story? Well, someone might say, well, I think I'm nonfiction, but for a lot of us, if you really think about it, we spin all sorts of tales for ourselves. If someone were to not rent, but borrow your life story from the library, what section would they pull it out of? Science fiction, mystery, romance, historical fiction. Or we live our lives, drama, yeah. Because as much as we're real, we kind of live in a lot of fictions at times, don't we? I can tell you that much of my life has been based upon true stories that I made up. Do you know what I mean by that? True stories that I made up. Stories like, my grandparents always got along. And in front of me they always did, but they didn't always get along. But that helped me learn how to be in relationships. I've also believed things like, I can do anything that I set my mind to. Isn't that true? Isn't that nice? And I loved comic books growing up, but when I started to try to be a superhero, I realized there were certain laws out there that didn't always work for me. So true in spirit, but not always in practice. Or I also believe the story that good guys always win in the end. And then I saw Game of Thrones. Anyone ever seen Game of Thrones? It doesn't always work that way. So the true stories that I made up have been really positive for my life, even though they don't always show up as factual in all experiences. But what's been negative in my life is I've also lived in accordance with a lot of false stories that I've made true. Anyone have any of those? Such as the most important people to please in life are your critics. Or I remember even as a kid, my brother and sister convinced me for a brief time that I was a robot that the family had purchased from Kmart. And that if I continued to misbehave, they were going to take me to the store and get a new one. Isn't that bad? And so I know that's not true, but sometimes when I'm in an insecure place, I go back to being that little robot that doesn't want to get taken back to the store. But I've also believed things like, if you really knew me, you wouldn't accept me. that I have to live my life in fear of rejection because there's something in me that's unworthy of acceptance. Anyone else have a tale that they've spun that's led them not to live your true story or to live in the fullness of who you are? We sometimes have to unwind those to get back to what's really true for us. And being in a church, we can say this, for me, the way that I get back to my true story is I have to ask myself that question, what is God's story in my life? What is God's story in your life? What is Spirit's story in your life? It's something I like to call your spiritual narrative. It's your last story standing. It's that story that's true about you when all the other tales have been told and you're left there with just you and your Creator. Arthur Schopenhauer was kind of a pessimistic philosopher. He said something I found kind of uplifting. He said it's something else to look back at your life and to see all the things that have taken place like it's been composed like a fine novel. To look back and to see what at the time seemed like incidental situations and how they strung together over time. Seemingly insignificant moments or relationships, all coming together to create this story of you. And one is left with the question, who composed the plot? Who composed the plot of your life? Speaking of science fiction, Ursula Le Guin, who's a great author and incredible spiritual woman. She passed away a few months ago, but she was doing an interview just before her 90th birthday, and she talked about the perspective that gave her of life. She said, it's like being high up on a mountain and looking back and saying, oh, look at the view. Gee, I never saw all that together before, Isn't that something? What a wonderful perspective that aging or just experience can give us, that ability to see our life not in pieces, but as a whole. Or I love what Carl Rogers said. He said, I'm not growing older, I'm older and growing. And so how are we deepening and opening up to see how all of the aspects of our life come together? Is there a spiritual story in my life? Is there a spiritual narrative active in your life? And I know for me, I find that story, I find that spiritual narrative in my life where I've given myself to a cause greater than myself. Where I've shown up to be a blessing, I've been blessed. I've met my Creator in the beautiful relationships that I've had, the wonderful opportunities that have been given me. That's where I find my spiritual narrative. Kathy, mentioned that I've been a minister for 11 years now, and I remember, really setting out the thing that was most dumb about what I was doing is I really wanted to tell my story myself. I really wanted to write it myself, and so I wanted to start a church for atheists and younger people. So I rented out a comedy club at a mall in Irvine, California, and was hoping that atheists and younger people would come, young adults. And some did, but a lot of different people came too. And I remember thinking to myself, what are you doing here? This wasn't what I was wanting. This was supposed to be a particular way, a particular kind of church, a particular thing that I was doing. And after a few months, even though things were kind of going okay, I broke down. It was no longer working for me. And it taught me a couple real important lessons about my spiritual narrative and life. And the first was that you don't choose who you minister to. Who you minister to chooses you. And I found that works in life too, especially with friendships. I haven't really chosen my friends. My friends have chosen me. The people that really matter are ones that have chosen me over time. And what a blessing, what a gift, what a miracle. Because I had nothing to do with that. Just that willingness to show up. And the other thing I learned is that the most beautiful stories of our lives, we don't tell ourselves, but we show up to be a vessel for that story. When I gave up trying to create my life and trusted working and co-creating with the divine to create it for me, amazing things happened. So I'm not saying don't have goals or don't outline what you want, but recognize sometimes that they aren't the end goal, they're the guiding star. They're that thing that we follow. And the beauty of my life has been sometimes giving up on exactly how it's supposed to look like, to focus on being my best self and bringing my virtues, my character to life. And that's when the best stories of my life have really been told. I love what Louisa May Alcott said. She said in Little Women, she said, "Far away there in the sunshine are my highest aspirations. I may not reach them, but I can look up and see their beauty, believe in them, and try to follow where they lead." Yeah, me too. Thank you. And there's something beautiful in life where you don't get exactly what you want, but what you get instead is better than even what you thought you wanted. When you follow your dreams and realize that what's being created for you is greater than you could have imagined. And that, to me, is when we really connect and find our base in our spiritual narrative. But I think that divine story at some level is with us, all of our lives. We have to think about things like synchronicities and serendipities. I remember my grandfather used to tell a story about moving to Southern California when he was a teenager, and his mom told him, "Well, you've got to go to school, and there's 2 buses." So he walked out to the bus stop, and if he took the bus one way, he would have gone to Paramount High School. If he would have taken the bus the other way, he would have gone to Compton High School. And he got on the bus going to Compton, and he would look back and he'd say, "I can't imagine what would happen if I took the bus the other way." Because by taking that bus to Compton High School, he met the person who would become his wife. He met her best friend who wound up becoming the wife of his brother. He met his wife and had my mom, and my mom had me. If he went to Paramount, I may not exist. Isn't that amazing? Just the little incidental things that happen that describe our whole life. Now, did he know what he was doing? No. But did something in him know? Something to think about. It's amazing how going a little bit one way or a little bit another way can change everything in life. We're acknowledging 50 years ago this month the murder of Martin Luther King Jr., and a story that not as many people know about Martin Luther King Jr. is he almost died. He was almost murdered 10 years before. He was on a book tour for his book Strive Towards Freedom, which talked about the Montgomery bus boycotts. That's the one with Rosa Parks in the back of the bus. It was the first big one that he was a part of. And he was signing books, and it was actually a black woman took a letter opener and stabbed him. And he was in the hospital for quite a long time. And the doctor said that if he would have even sneezed, the cut was so close to his aorta that he would have died. And he was in the hospital one day, and he received a famous letter from a little boy where the little boy says, "Dr. King, the doctor said that if you would have sneezed, you would have died. I'm so thankful you didn't sneeze." Aren't we thankful in a sense that he didn't sneeze? What would have happened if he did sneeze? Surely, there was a narrative for civil rights that would have happened, but it would have happened in a very different way. I'm so grateful for all of us that we didn't sneeze in those times where things could have gone one way and not another. And of course, we've all experienced lives too that have been taken way too soon, that they didn't seem to fulfill their full potential. Viktor Frankl once said that sometimes the best works in life are the unfinished. Those that don't seem to complete their story, but nonetheless so represent their character, even in passing away. And Viktor Frankl is another great example of someone who planned his life one way, and it worked out quite another, yet he still realized his goal. That's something about the spiritual narrative, is when we're here to do something in life, to be somebody, to be the qualities of spirit, that life has a way, no matter what, of helping us to reach that. And Frankl was a young, aspiring psychologist. He had something he called logotherapy, which was about the psychology of meaning. And he was really into it, and it was actually in his pocket when he was taken to a concentration camp at the beginning of World War II. And he was stripped of everything he had. He would lose his wife, his parents, everyone he ever known. But still, nonetheless, not because of, but in spite of this, he strengthened in his philosophy and still would achieve, because he was broken out and freed at the end of the war, a great magnitude of his psychology. And he even shares a synchronistic story of getting an offer to go to the United States because of his fame. and yet to go before the Jews were taken to the concentration camp, he would have to have left his parents. He would have saved his wife, and so he wasn't sure what to do. Do I go or do I not go? And he tells the story of sitting at the dinner table one time, and his dad was there, and his dad had something in his hand. He said, "Dad, what was that?" He's all, "Well, the Nazis burned down one of our synagogues, and there was some marble stones here, and this one is about a particular commandment." And he said, "Well, what commandment is that, Dad?" And he said, "Honor thy father and thy mother." And it was the sign, for Frankel. He put away the visa to go to America and accepted whatever his fate might be. He famously said, "A man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears towards a human being who affectionately waits for him or to an unfinished work will never be able to throw away his life. He knows the why for his existence and will be able to bear almost any how." Have you found that true in your life, that when you know your why, you can go through any how? You're always going to bring out that truth of who you are. I've worked with a lot of people, I think, who've been lost from their true story, lost from their spiritual narrative, and are instead caught up in stories others have told about them, stories to try to protect themselves, stories that push other people down in order to lift themselves up. And for me, living a full life is, reuniting with that narrative again. It's that willingness to sort through the layers of falsehoods we've convinced ourselves to live back in alignment with our spiritual truth. And we talk about living in an era of fake news, which may be fake news itself. But one of the oldest things in the world of journalism is what they call yellow journalism. That's where they give you a very exasperated, sensational headline to get you to read the story, and hopefully it's facts in there. So today it could be something like disaster. Trump's early morning tweets, or it could be doomsday. Government shutdown looming in the distance, or whatever it may be. And so you have these sensational headlines that try to draw you into the story, and you've got to go through the story to realize they don't quite match up with the dramatic headline that you're being told. And yet I find that we do that in our own lives sometimes too. It's over. Matt is 10 minutes late for dinner. Or, I'm a failure. I didn't get the job. And part of getting back to our true story is learning not to stop ourselves from being sensational, but when we do that, to pause and to try and get back to what really is. Sometimes for me, if I try to go straight to the spiritual truth, that's that spiritual bypass. I'm missing out. Sometimes I just have to get back to, my date is 10 minutes late. Or I didn't get the job, let me look into why. And as I begin to look at that, then I can start to remember the truth. I can ask myself that question, what is the last story standing in my life? When I get in an argument with my wife and I'm just so mad at her and she's like, I hate him. It takes a while to get back to that last story standing, which is that we love each other. We would never intentionally hurt one another, and that we're committed to living our life in harmony and joy. But it's easy to get sensational. It's easy to forget that, and it's especially easy to forget that about ourselves, to get so caught up in the sensational false headlines that we forget why we're here and who we're here to become. And a final key to share with you that's always helps me achieve my spiritual narrative is to get out of competing with others. Get out of judging others. Get out of living other people's stories for them, and embrace your own story. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, I love something he says. He says in this thing called You that if you want to stay out of hell, then no one can ever be in it. If you want to stay out of hell, then no one can ever be in it. Doesn't mean don't be critical. Doesn't mean don't observe when someone's doing something wrong and point it out. But if you're living your story based upon keeping other people in judgment because they're not as righteous as you are, you're damning yourself. And for me, if that's true, Holmes' statement, it also follows that if you want to be in heaven, then no one can ever be outside of it. That when we pray for our highest good, that the purest prayer isn't just for ourselves and our own highest good, but the highest good for all. And that's one of the great secrets to me of Science of Mind, is recognizing that when we pursue our own good, when we pursue our own spiritual narrative, not worrying about other people's stories, but caring for ourselves and living in alignment with the divine, not only is it the highest and best for us, but for everyone around us. I believe that each of us has something special to share in this world, that each of us has something significant and meaningful, that the greatest myth that's ever been told is that your life doesn't matter and that you're insignificant. And that when we reconnect with that spiritual source of who we are, when we stay committed to our virtues, our values, and the things that we care about, a story begins to be told through us and for us that helps us weave and bring about the most sacred gifts in us to meet that sacred heart of life. So I'm really grateful to get to share with everybody. I'm going to do a closing prayer and just invite you to take a deep breath with me. And just invite each of us to become aware as much as we can of that string that connects all the experiences of our lives. Sometimes in our philosophy we encourage folks not to look at the past, but I'm encouraging us to become aware of all those experiences that we've gone through. Those that defined who we are, those that we defined who we were in spite of a negative experience that we may have had. All those things that have come together. And although I'm sure there's experiences to not give thanks for, can we perhaps go to a place of wholeness, to give thanks for the whole of our life? To not have to give thanks for every little thing, but to know that there is a wholeness, a guidance, a divine truth that ultimately demonstrates itself in our lives as grace, as harmony, as deep peace, and as a limitless joy. Knowing that when we live in alignment with our divine story, in mind, in heart, and in deed, and in word, that we begin to allow it to be told in a greater way in our lives. That if we feel stuck on any page, that it's simply time to let go, to be willing to move forward into a more profound experience of our divine story. So giving thanks for this truth about our hearts today, I invite us to know it as well of anyone we care about and love, knowing indeed that there is divine opportunities for a greater story to be told as well. We let it be and become, and so it is. Amen.
Yeah, don't get excited.